look at a beehive and you look at
it blows my
snowflake,
mind. I don't know how they make those hexagons and stuff inside. It's crazy.
Yeah, or whatever ogons they are. Again, geometry twice. But and I tried to square a circle, but there's something unique about a lot of things that I can't explain. How does a bee make a perfectly shaped hexagon or octagon? How does snow, just the way that it forms in the sky, create such a beautiful snowflake? Looking under a microscope. And why do we have to look under a microscope for that? This guy said that art is nothing without the viewer.
Yeah.
Well, in the case of a snowflake, or even in the case of a beehive, you have to do something to view it.
Yeah.
Snowflake, you got to have a special instrument to see its beauty. A beehive, you got to cut it open to see its beauty.
Right.
Well, I guess not. I guess you can see it from the outside. But it's just so interesting to me that there has to be an element and a spiritual element to that.
Yeah.
There has to be something or some, I don't know if it's some message that's trying to be told to us or some speech from God, but there's something unique in pretty much everything that exists.
Yeah.
And there's a little more I want to say about sacred art, but I'm going to hold that. Well, specifically about how sacred art applies to a crop circle, and I'm going to intentionally hold off on that.
The only thing I wanted that I liked, and I just wanted to quickly, not add, but I just really did like the comment in the first clip where the guy's talking about, and I think in terms of art, when we talk about art and then like a beehive, like specifically if we make art to be art, like a beehive is, I guess, created for some function, to be the beehive, to be the home or whatever. But I guess if you're an artist and you make art, the reason you're making art is to be shown and to be viewed. But in simple terms, in that clip, the guy's basically saying, I just find it interesting that's like part of art is the interaction between the viewer and the art. It requires the viewer, in the context of art. But when you look at the art, you're not just looking at the art, it's almost like a window to the creator. Because, and think about how, like, when people study art, they study, like, the brush strokes of particular artists. Like, they'll, like, get real close to the painting and be like, do you see how Van Gogh, like, this is how he moved his brush and things like that. So you see a little bit about the creator in simple terms.
And maybe that's what I didn't clarify well enough. I think the same thing exists with God as our artist. And in this case, I think this guy truly believes that aliens are the artists because he said, I want to go up into the chapel in their spaceship because they make beautiful windows. In my mind, it's a little bit different. There is something unique about that beehive.
Yeah.
We do get close to objects to try to study their brush stroke, so to speak. We put things under a microscope all the time. Now, sometimes it's just for the function of seeing how a bacteria splits or grows.
Yeah.
Bacterium splits and grows. But, in the case of a snowflake or in the case of a beehive, the beehive is the bee's home.
Yeah.
But why does it have to be a hexagon?
Yeah.
What's the point of it being so almost beautifully symmetrical? So there is something there. I'm not saying God's trying to tell us something, but there is something there where it kind of is a window into the beauty of the world that God created.
It could just be an art of the creator.
And again, that's the spiritual side, which is why you selected me for that, and that there is a spiritual component.
And the just the element of sacred art, or the second clip where the guy's talking about the rules of sacred art, it's just interesting. The reason I think it's worth mentioning is because if you don't talk, all of this is that's why I said at the beginning that, like, I feel like this was going to be the podcast was like a very definitive overall look at crop circles, because everybody else maybe takes, like, let's just talk about the history, or let's just talk about the science, or let's just talk about the people or whatever. But we're talking about everything. But one aspect of it is that if you look at crop circles as art, then that becomes part of the conversation where, as you decide what it is or what it means, you're full to ignore the beauty and the artistic element of it if you're trying to wrap your brain around it. So I just think it deserves to be part of the conversation. Any other thoughts, Jeff? All right. Now the big one. So we've been putting this off the science. So let me just kind of fly through my notes here. These are all the scientific things that basically, when the cereologists go out and study crop circles, these are the anomalies that they begin to see in fields that don't let's say this. If they go out to a field and it looks like, oh, there's a bunch of footprints. Oh, these plants look like they're knocked over because the stems are broken. Oh, it looks sloppy. You know, it doesn't look perfectly symmetrical and things like that. If it gives a lot of characteristics of being a man-made crop circle, the things that we're about to discuss aren't present. But suddenly, the things we're about to talk about are present in crop circles that don't immediately offer up man-made hoax as a simple solution. And that's where this gets interesting. So first, let me go through the notes. I do have some audio clips, but as I go through, as I touch upon these, stop me. As soon as you just go ahead, cut me off if there's something you want to talk about. First is some of the differences when they measure the soil, the content of the soil inside and outside of a crop circle. So if they go out and they study a crop circle, here's some of the differences they'll notice. Like, let's study the soil inside the circle, and then maybe like 10 feet outside, 20 feet, 30 feet, 50, 100, 150, all the way out to 300 feet away, okay? First is the nodes, and this was a big one you guys probably remember, but the nodes of the crop stems, basically, what they show evidence of is the nodes oftentimes show that they've expanded, which would occur from rapid heating. And some show that they've burst open, which would showcase like some kind of instant rapid heating of these nodes. We can talk about that. The tops of the crops that are bent over wind up. The tops of the crops that are bent over wind up different, closer to harvesting than the tops of the crops outside the circle when it comes time to harvest. Mm-hmm. The soil usually indicates presence of magnetic iron, which is microscopic. This presence is interesting, but there is a distribution that there's like these microscopic magnetic iron deposits. They'll be found heavily inside the circle, but as you gradually get away from the circle, it's basically like they chart it and it's a straight linear, like it gradually just goes down as you get away, the further away from the circle. So they're like, if this was man-made, or if people were just dropping these, first of all, how could you go around dropping microscopic particles of iron, but it would be like an uneven distribution, which is not the case. Here was something interesting. When crop circles occur on crops that aren't mature yet, so when a circle happens on a young crop, the seeds of that crop end up not maturing and don't produce new plants or seeds. But if the crop circle occurs on more mature crops, so if the crops are more mature when the crop circle occurs, the seeds from those plants end up being further enhanced and further energized, usually having a 50% increase in protein. Okay. Other people, just from science, people have noticed they'll walk into a crop circle and the pigmentation on their skin changes. That suddenly the blood starts flowing differently inside them. Like there's this one video in one of the documentaries. You guys might not remember it because I'm not sure if it was the one that had you watch the whole thing or not. There's a woman that walks into a crop circle and like whenever she like moves her, like starts putting her hand down, like her hand goes white because all the blood starts leaving it, as opposed to when she does that away from the crop circle. That doesn't happen. We've all heard the stories about people that go into crop circles and experience batteries draining, things that are run on electronic devices suddenly shut off, power down, lose their energy, and really more stuff about the elongated nodes. Any one of those particular things that you guys want to expand upon or
not yet
mention? Nothing on the science.
Not yet.
Not yet, as in move along from the science.
No, not yet. No, you can keep talking.
Well, no, I mean those are the main points. I had
not yet in terms of I'm giving my opinion on what you said.
Okay. Well, let me play the two clips and then see what you guys have to say about the clips. Okay. First one, clip 2 is 50 seconds. Clip 3 is another 3-minute one here. So here's the first one, 50 seconds.
Some of the results clearly show
the smoking lady.
That when those energies, when this crop circle making system impacts the plants, if they're not mature, if the seed is not formed, what happens is that those seeds are dehydrated, they don't mature properly, and they don't produce new seeds, new plants. If that were to happen all over the world, simultaneously we'd lose our food stock. Obviously that's important. In addition, the germination work shows that when these energies impact the plants, later on, when the seed is fully developed, then you get this very energized effect. Levengood and Burke were able to demonstrate that that was due to these very precise electrical pulses. And out of that grew their discovery of how to replicate that effect.
The crop circle.
It suddenly dawned on me that maybe if I buried water, little bottles of water, as soon as possible after a formation had appeared, if I buried them about 2 inches deep, they were only little 25 ml bottles of water.
Research by burying small bottles of water for a period of 10 days gave very interesting results. Frequency analysis showed that the water samples had altered their frequency pattern differently from the control samples outside the circles. Furthermore, the bacteria content was much higher within the formation. A third analysis method showed that the water had increased its ability in so-called molecular memory.
So here we are with 3 different techniques, all showing that something anomalous was happening to the water buried inside. I'm perfectly certain this phenomenon is a beneficial one. It's not malevolent, but the energies that we're dealing with a set of very complex, subtle energies which interact in a personal way with our own metabolisms. People have these wonderful events and they come back and they're sort of radiant people. And this is lovely. But I have to say, and I do have to emphasize this quite strongly, that not everybody feels well. If they feel ill, come out very quickly. If anybody is pregnant or thinking of becoming pregnant, I'd say don't go in, because we don't know really what we're dealing with. And most emphatically, if anybody's got a health device which is geared by a battery, for goodness sake, don't go in. We've had too many electrical failures, dramatic electrical failures. Sometimes I've been flying over a formation and the instruments in the plane have gone all haywire. And my camera refuses to work just when I've got the most perfect shot. It won't work. But again, another thing we're doing is measuring the protein content of seeds taken from inside as opposed to outside. And what we found last year was that we're getting a 50% increase in the protein level from inside.
Maybe this can be connected to the increased growth rate that was shown in the crop seeds. But it also seems that human hormones can be influenced within the crop circles too.
Well, certain people, the thyroid was most affected of all. One woman had a 40% decrease in her thyroid level. And yet here we were in a time scale of between 2 and 2.5 hours and a 40% drop. So what the hell was going on? And this again shows us that in terms of scientific research, we are finding things existing inside the formations which don't exist outside.
Okay. So the first audio clip there, she's talking about how they notice the effects of the germination, so that the crop circles do have an effect on the germination, which we talked about briefly. And then also the second one, she talks about a couple different things. She talks about how she did an experiment where she buried capsules of water in the soil. She put, again, water inside and outside and further away, and noticed that the water that was buried inside the crop circle had a change to the water on the molecular level caused by some kind of energy. That also, there's effects on people's hormones and things of that nature. So all in all, there's just a lot of quantifiable data that we're kind of brushing through here. But before we move along, any comments on any one of these particular interest you, Jeff? Now, you said are you still holding off?
A lot of them interest me, but I'm waiting.
Okay. So finally, the last thing we're going to talk about before we offer a conclusion, because really this is where the documentary stories kind of lead us to, especially in the one, but it's called the Chilbolton crop circle. So in 2001, basically, there's a observatory in Hampshire, England, called Chilbolton. On August 4th, 2001, a formation was discovered that was unlike anything that had ever been noticed before. It didn't really appear like a geometric formation or anything like that, but what they realized when it was observed from the sky, it was a face. Okay, so this is the first time where we have a crop circle that looks like a face rather than just kind of like random geometric drawings and so forth. 3 days later, in that same field, another crop circle